He didn't wait for his enemies to fall onto the stake. Vlad lifted them into it alive. Vlad III didn't just kill people, he engineered their suffering like a man designing a machine. Every scream had a purpose. Every corpse was a message. And by the end of this story, you'll understand why historians spent centuries burying the darkest parts of what he truly did. Because tonight, I'm revealing 3 methods of torture and psychological warfare so horrifying that even his allies, men who fought beside him, called him inhuman. One method happened during a dinner party where he impaled his own guests while he calmly kept eating. One was a biological weapon that made soldiers beg for death. And one is so disturbing that modern military strategy textbooks still reference it by name. Right arrow before we go deeper, hit subscribe, because the final method is something most history books refuse to print. That naturally lands around the 30 to 40 second mark. But to understand how a human becomes worse than his own myth, you have to picture Europe in 1462. The Ottoman Empire wasn't rising, it was devouring everything in its path. 3 years earlier they took Constantinople, a city that survived 1,000 years. Their army? The most advanced military machine on earth. Standing in their way was Wallachia, a tiny border state not even a third the size of modern Romania. Population? Maybe 500,000. Army? 30,000 at best. And this is where Vlad Dracula ruled. But here's the part history class always leaves out. Vlad grew up in hell. At 11 years old, the Ottomans took him hostage. For 6 years he lived in their court, surrounded by torture, interrogations, broken bodies, and he watched everything. He studied everything. That's how he survived. They tortured prisoners in front of him. They buried his older brother alive. They executed his father. They brainwashed his younger brother, converting him into an Ottoman loyalist. Imagine being a child and realizing the only way to live is to memorize how fear works, how bones break, how minds collapse. Vlad didn't just survive, he made himself a weapon. And he swore that if he ever escaped, he'd use their own brutality against them. Now it's 1462. Sultan Mehmed II, the conqueror of Constantinople, marches into Wallachia with 90,000 soldiers. 3 times more than Vlad. The outcome should have been guaranteed. But Vlad didn't fight like a general. He fought like someone who'd been forged inside the enemy's dungeon. What he created next wasn't a battle tactic. It was psychological demolition. And modern special forces still study it because of how devastatingly effective it was. Put yourself in the boots of an Ottoman scout, June 1462. You ride ahead of the main army. You smell something before you even see it. That thick, sweet rot that clings to the back of your throat. But this isn't a dead animal. This is huge. The smell fills the entire valley. Then you see 1 stake. Then 10. Then 100. Then thousands. Until you realize you're staring at 20,000 human bodies, Ottoman prisoners, impaled alive and arranged in perfect concentric circles around the fortress city of Targovist. This is the forest of the impaled, and Vlad created it with cold, mathematical cruelty. Most people think he used sharp stakes. He didn't. Rounded stakes were used. Because a sharp one kills too fast. Rounded stakes force the body to split instead of tear. The stake enters through the rectum, travels upward past the intestines, past the stomach, and exits through the chest, shoulder, or neck. And the victim stays alive. Conscious. Screaming. For 2 to 3 days. A Turkish chronicler, Chalka Condyles, witnessed it. He wrote that the smell made soldiers vomit. The screams echoed across the valley non-stop. Soldiers couldn't eat for days. Officers fainted at the sight. But Vlad wasn't just killing prisoners. He was sending a message. The highest-ranking officers were impaled on the tallest stakes. Then junior officers. Then common soldiers at the bottom. Every Ottoman soldier understood instantly. The more important you are, the more agonizing your death will be. That kind of terror doesn't scare an army. It paralyzes it. 20,000 bodies. 3 kilometers of stakes. Every inch arranged with purpose. But here's the part almost no one knows. This wasn't Vlad's opening move. The forest was his answer to something even more ruthless, something he did before this. What comes next isn't a battlefield. It's a landscape engineered for extinction. Because while everyone remembers Vlad Dracula for the forest of the impaled, almost nobody knows the one weapon he unleashed that wouldn't be outlawed for another 400 years. A weapon that doesn't roar, doesn't bleed, doesn't explode. It infects. To understand how terrifying this move really was, You have to put yourself in the mind of the most powerful man on earth in 1462. Sultan Mehmed II, the conqueror of Constantinople, the man whose army shattered empires. 90,000 elite Ottoman soldiers are marching behind you. Your armor gleams. Your banners stretch across the horizon. You've crushed cities far larger than Wallachia. This should be routine. Then, something feels wrong. Your men cross the Danube River, and the world changes. Villages are burned to black skeletons. Every field is ash. Every grain silo melted into slag. The smoke hasn't even cooled. You advance 10 kilometers. Then 20. Then 40. Still nothing. No food. No animals. Not even a stray dog. It's as if the land itself has been murdered. Historians call it a scorched earth policy. But that phrase is too clean, too academic. What Vlad did wasn't policy. It was annihilation. He ordered every civilian within 70 kilometers of the front to flee into the mountains. Anyone who couldn't move, elderly, sick, infants, were taken by his soldiers and evacuated. Then his troops destroyed everything. Fields were dug up and salted. Crops burned. Houses torched. Roads sabotaged. Wells poisoned. But here's the part history books never emphasize. Vlad didn't use herbs, toxins, or animal blood. He used plague corpses. Bodies swollen with infection. Bodies carrying bacteria that European medicine wouldn't even understand for another 450 years. He had his soldiers throw them into every well, every stream, every water source the Ottomans could possibly reach. This wasn't defense. This was biological warfare, in 1462. By modern standards, it's classified as a war crime so extreme the Geneva Protocol specifically bans it. But in Vlad's world? This was genius. Within days, Ottoman soldiers started collapsing. First dysentery. Then fevers. Vomiting. Organ failure. Men weren't dying from sword wounds. They were dying from their water. Now imagine being a soldier in that army. You're hungry. You're dehydrated. You can't drink without risking death. You can't retreat or you'll be executed. You can't advance because you don't know what Vlad has prepared next. And at night, that's when the real terror begins. June 17, 1462. The sky is moonless. The Ottoman camp is so large it stretches kilometers in every direction. Campfires glow like scattered stars. Then, a distant rumble. Horse hooves. At first, the guards think it's their own cavalry returning. The riders wear Ottoman armor. They shout Ottoman commands. They carry Ottoman weapons. But by the time someone realizes something is wrong, it's already too late. Because Vlad didn't just attack the camp. He became the camp. He disguised his best cavalry in Ottoman uniforms. He taught them the passwords, the formations, even the tone of voice Ottoman officers used. And with that camouflage, his men rode straight into the heart of the world's most powerful army. No dramatic music. No heroic speeches. Just chaos. Soldiers cut down in their sleep. Command tents slashed open. Horses stabbed in the darkness. Lanterns overturned. Fire spreading. Screaming everywhere. The Ottomans panicked. They attacked silhouettes. Shadows. Each other. By morning, 15,000 Ottoman soldiers were dead. Not because Vlad's army killed them, but because they killed one another in the confusion. Mehmed survived only because his personal guard formed a desperate human shield around his tent. But when daylight finally came, that's when morale truly shattered. This wasn't random slaughter. Vlad positioned the corpses in deliberate patterns for the Ottoman officers to find. Some were arranged in circles. Some in spirals. Some had limbs removed and placed beside their heads, almost like words. Ears severed. Noses cut off. Eyes gouged out. But the worst detail? He collected the severed noses and ears, thousands of them, and sent them to the king of Hungary as proof of body count, the way hunters send animal trophies. He turned mutilated humans into accounting records. And the Ottoman soldiers understood the message perfectly. This man is not fighting a war. He is fighting a psychological extermination campaign. Desertion skyrocketed. Fear spread faster than the disease in their camp. But here's the thing. Everything you've heard so far, every torture, every corpse, every raid, was nothing compared to Vlad's final method. His last tactic wasn't physical. It wasn't biological. It was psychological disintegration. A method so horrifying that captured soldiers begged to be impaled instead. Because impalement at least had an end. an escape. But the thing Vlad made them do at the dinner table? The decision he forced onto fathers, husbands, and sons? There is no word in any language that captures the cruelty of it. And once you hear what happened at that feast, you'll understand why historians tried to bury the accounts. Because this next part, what you're about to hear, is the part historians whisper about. The part they footnote, soften, or skip entirely. Because this final method, Vlad Dracula's most psychologically devastating weapon, didn't just kill people. It destroyed the human mind before the human body. And the worst part? Vlad designed it that way. The German pamphlets, the same ones printed only a generation after Vlad's death, document the decision so horrifying it reads like madness. Captured soldiers who had families were given a choice. Kill a member of your own family, or watch Vlad torture them to death in front of you. Then torture you afterwards. Then hunt down any surviving relatives and finish the bloodline. It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. And here's where the story becomes almost impossible to comprehend. Some soldiers actually did it. Not because they were evil. Not because they were broken. But because Vlad convinced them it was the merciful option. Imagine that level of psychological control. Imagine staring at your child, your wife, your father, and being told that the most humane thing you can do is kill them yourself. And then, after they did it, after they chose the lesser suffering, Vlad had them impaled anyway. No forgiveness. No reward. No mercy. It was a demonstration. Your choices mean nothing. Your humanity means nothing. I control everything. This wasn't execution. It was annihilation of identity. Other prisoners refused. And Vlad made good on every threat. The Byzantine chroniclers described the aftermath with a horror so raw that modern historians rarely quote the passages directly. The men who survived his dungeons didn't simply die later. They unraveled. They returned catatonic. Unable to speak, unable to blink, unable to understand language or light. Some clawed their own eyes out. Some refused food until they starved. Some screamed until their throats tore open and then continued screaming silently. These weren't soldiers anymore. These were empty shells. What happened in those chambers wasn't torture. It wasn't punishment. It was the systematic destruction of the human psyche. And while this nightmare unfolded, while lives and minds collapsed, Vlad Dracula sat at his dinner table, eating. Multiple sources, German pamphlets, Russian manuscripts, even Romanian chronicles, describe the same detail. Vlad held feasts while people died on stakes just outside the windows. Not metaphorically. Not figuratively. The banquet hall overlooked the courtyard where men writhed on wooden spikes, their bodies twitching in the last stages of agony. Their screams echoed between courses. Some accounts describe him raising his goblet as if toasting their suffering. One tale says he dipped his bread in their blood. We can't confirm that exact detail with certainty. But here's what we can confirm. The performance was intentional. Vlad wanted people to believe he didn't just tolerate pain. He enjoyed it. He savored it. He wasn't just building a reputation. He was building a mythology. A monster so terrifying that stories about him would spread faster than armies. And they did. Merchants whispered. Ambassadors carried tales home. Survivors, those who still had enough sanity left to speak, spread stories that made Vlad sound less like a man and more like a demon in human shape. Fear became his second army. Now imagine Sultan Mehmed II, conqueror of Constantinople, undefeated commander, ruler of one of the greatest empires in the world, marching toward Vlad. He expects resistance. He expects traps. He does not expect what he sees when he reaches Targovist. The scouts come back pale, silent, unable to find words. So the Sultan rides forward himself. And there it is. 20,000 bodies impaled in precise rows, stretching for kilometers. A forest of human suffering. But one stake stands higher, taller, dressed differently. A body wearing robes of gold-threaded silk, clothing reserved for diplomats, royal envoys, high-ranking officials. Mehmed pushes closer. The face is swollen but recognizable. Hamza Pasha. His own childhood friend. His envoy. The man he personally sent to negotiate peace months earlier. And now Hamza is dead. Not just killed, but displayed in the most humiliating position in the entire forest. The message is unmistakable. Your rank means nothing. Your relationship to the Sultan means nothing. No one is safe. According to multiple sources, Sultan Mehmed, the man who did not flinch when he conquered a 1,000-year-old empire, vomited. Then he whispered words that military historians still quote. "I cannot conquer a man who does such things." Think about that. This is the general who shattered Constantinople. The commander who defeated Byzantines, Hungarians, Serbs. The strategist who never once retreated. Yet in Wallachia, facing an army 1/3 his size, he turns around. For the first and only time in his career, Mehmed retreats from a battle he should have easily won. Not because he was defeated, but because his men refused to fight. They had seen the forest. They had heard the stories. They knew what capture meant. Vlad's psychological warfare had done what no army could do. It broke the Ottoman Empire's will. Vlad's brutality saved Wallachia. But it didn't save Vlad. His allies, the Hungarians, were just as terrified of him as his enemies. 4 years later they arrested him, locked him away, and eventually abandoned him. In 1476 the Ottomans finally killed him. They beheaded him and displayed his head on a stake in Constantinople. A perfect, bitter ending for the man who turned impalement into an art form. The numbers are staggering. Conservative estimates, 40,000 dead. High-end estimates, 100,000. In a population of 500,000, that's 1 in every 5 people. And here's where history twists into something surreal. Within decades, pamphlets about Vlad spread across Europe. Some true, some exaggerated, all horrifying. Centuries later, an Irish writer named Bram Stoker reads these accounts. The blood, the impalement, the dinner feast, and transforms the real Vlad Dracula into a supernatural monster. The historical butcher becomes the fictional vampire. The real terror becomes legend. And the legend becomes immortal. And maybe that's the most terrifying part of all. Fiction didn't exaggerate Vlad Dracula. It softened him. Because what the real Vlad did was so violent, so systemically engineered, so deliberately psychological, that the human mind needs myth just to survive the truth of it. Fiction gives us a safe cage. Reality doesn't. But here's the question that bleeds through every historical record like a wound that won't close. Because the answer, the honest, uncomfortable, morally nauseating answer, is yes. Vlad didn't just fight wars. He weaponized fear itself. He turned the battlefield into a theater of horror so overwhelming that entire armies collapsed before they even reached him. Today we call that psychological operations. Back then, it was just called Vlad. Modern militaries study catastrophic deterrence, the strategy of making the cost of victory so gruesomely high that the enemy decides the battle isn't worth winning. The U.S. Army's psychological operations manuals reference this principle without naming him, but every historian knows where it came from. Vlad didn't invent deterrence. He perfected it. Some scholars argue that his brutality was the only thing standing between Eastern Europe and total Ottoman conquest. That conventional warfare would have failed. That terror, and terror alone, was the blade sharp enough to cut through an empire. And here's the darkest twist. But the other side of the argument is just as undeniable, and just as disturbing. Vlad's campaigns showed the world exactly what happens when warfare has no rules, no limits, no moral lines. His actions helped create the very foundations of modern international law. The Geneva Conventions exist because commanders like Vlad proved the nightmare of a world without restraints. A world where winning is more important than humanity. So what do we call Vlad Dracula? A monster? A genius? A traumatized child who grew into a weapon shaped by the men who enslaved him? A patriot who went so far into darkness that even his allies whispered prayers when he entered the room? The answer is simple. He was a boy ripped from his home, raised in captivity, taught cruelty by the people who held him hostage. He was a ruler who believed that mercy was a luxury his country could not afford. He was a commander who left tens of thousands of bodies rotting on stakes because he believed that horror could rewrite the fate of nations. And the terrifying part? Because in 1462 fear won a war. But it also destroyed the man who used it. That's why Vlad Dracula is one of history's greatest paradoxes. He saved Wallachia, but lost himself. He protected his people, but became the thing they feared most. He carved his name into history, but only in blood. So now I want to ask you something. Not as entertainment, not as shock value, but as a brutally real moral test. Or a monster who should be condemned for eternity? Asterisk asterisk. Do we judge him for crossing every human line imaginable? Or do we thank him for stopping an empire? There is no easy answer. There never was. That's why his story haunts us 600 years later. Drop your take in the comments. I genuinely want to know where you stand. And if you made it this far, then you're not just watching history. You're surviving it. Make sure you're subscribed because next week I'm revealing the story of Vlad's own son and the betrayal that shattered the entire Dracula legacy. It's a story of power, revenge, loyalty, and a new kind of horror. You won't want to miss it. And remember, they were men.